workbook here and there, so use it. It's a lot of good stuff. So we're going to get into this part. We learned what truth was, some pretty good stuff last session. So before we leave tonight, we want to make sure we leave and make sure that God exists. That's a pretty good idea. Probably everybody in the room understands that, but you may not understand this, but outside the Bible, there's a lot of evidence of God's existence. So if you can speak to the existence of God to people who don't understand the Bible, and you can lead them in those areas. So what we're going to look at right here, does God exist? So Genesis 1 says, in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. That's simple to us. And so we're going to get into more and more scientists. In fact, all scientists pretty much agree now that it's in a fact that the universe started at a point in time. And he calls that the Big Bang. So we're going to get into that, and he's going to tell you why that is so profound as far as the idea of God. So let's go ahead and roll that tape, okay?
Us into the next lesson, and that's going to be lesson 2, Does God Exist? And this is called In the Beginning. All right, so far, we've pointed out that yes, truth does exist. And now we're going to look at the question, does God exist? It is true out there that there's truth. So what we've done, if our reasoning is good to this point, the Bible could be true. Well, Richard Dawkins' book could be true. But what's false? Relativism and postmodernism. They're false. They don't even meet their own standard. Now we're going to see whether the Bible's right about God or Richard Dawkins is right about God. And when we talk about God, we've got to define our terms. What do we mean by God? We're going to talk about a theistic God. What's a theistic God? A theistic God is a God who's beyond the world, who created the world and sustains the world. A theistic God is sort of like a painter is to a painting. Michelangelo paints the painting. His attributes are expressed in the painting, but Michelangelo's not the painting. The worldview that believes God is the painting is called pantheism. We'll get into that in a minute. By the way, what does it mean when, in fact, Pastor Duran was here when I was here last night, he said, you're made in the image and likeness of God. What does that mean? Does that mean you look like God? No, you don't look like God. Why? Because God is an immaterial being. It means that you're a person like God, that you have a mind, emotion, and a will. In other words, his attributes are in you. He's given you attributes like his. You have intellect, you have emotion, and you have a will. You're a moral being. You can make choices like God can. You can think, you can feel, you can want, just like God. You're made in his image. And if God exists, his attributes are expressed in the universe, but he's not the universe. And his attributes are expressed in you, but he's not you. In fact, here's how you can put most major world religions into one of these 3 religious worldviews. You see the hands under the world on the left? That's called theism. God made all. Judaism, Christianity, and Islam are theistic. In other words, there's a being distinct from the universe who created the universe and sustains it to this day. You see the next one with the hand in the world, that's called pantheism. God is all. God is you. God is the grass. God is the trees. God is all things. That's pantheism. You know pantheism. Use the Force, Luke. The whole Star Wars series is pantheistic. There's not a God distinct from the universe. God is the universe. And the last major religious worldview, you don't see a hand at all, you just see a world, is atheism. No God at all. Religious humanists would be considered atheists. Now, I'm here to say, by the way, that if you define religion as someone's explanation of ultimate reality, everybody's religious. Richard Dawkins is religious. He's got his ideas of how we got here and where we're going. Also, by the way, everybody's a fundamentalist. I thought just Christians and Muslims. No, everyone's a fundamentalist. Oh, we have different fundamentals. Richard Dawkins has fundamentals. We got here through some cosmic accident, and he thinks you ought to treat him in a certain way. You know, he says there is no objective morality in his book here, but then he writes his own 10 commandments. Anyone see anything inconsistent about that? Right? He has fundamentals he believes in. And by the way, also, everybody has faith. Now, I'm using faith in the sense Richard Dawkins would use it, not in the sense the Bible uses it. Dawkins says, look, if you don't have evidence, you've got faith. In other words, it's believing something in spite of the evidence, even sometimes against the evidence. Well, if that's the definition of faith he's using, then I actually think you got to have a lot more faith to be an atheist than a Christian. Why? Because there's a lot of evidence for Christianity, and we're about to go through it. So therefore, you just need a little bit of faith to believe it. But I think there may be just a couple of things on the side of the atheistic ledger, perhaps, but not a lot of evidence, and therefore you need a lot more faith to be an atheist. That's why we call the book, I Don't Have Enough Faith to Be an Atheist. Now, what is the evidence that God exists? There are three great arguments for the existence of a theistic God that we go through in the book. There's more than this, but these are the main three. And from these three arguments, we're going to see, and when I say argument, I don't mean like you're mad at somebody. I say these are formal ways of providing evidence, okay? From these three arguments, we're going to see that there is a spaceless, timeless, immaterial, powerful, moral, personal, intelligent creator out there. We're not even going to open the Bible to do this. We're just going to look at two scientific arguments and one philosophical argument. Here they are. The first argument is the argument for the beginning of the universe, known as the cosmological argument. Cosmological comes from the Greek word cosmos, which means world or universe. It says if the universe had a beginning, it must have had a beginner. The second argument is the argument from design, known as the teleological argument. Telos meaning design or purpose. It says if there's design in the universe and design in life, like you, then there must be a designer. Now, these two arguments are scientific in nature. You can get evidence for these arguments by either looking through a telescope or looking into a microscope, which we will do. The third argument, however, is not scientific at all. It's more philosophical in nature, yet it's the argument we've known since we were very small children. And it's the argument from morality known as the moral argument. And it says if there's one thing morally wrong out there, like it's wrong to torture babies for fun, or it's wrong to murder 6 million Jews in a Holocaust, then there has to be a God. Why? Because if there is no God, if there is no standard beyond humanity, then that's just your opinion against Hitler's opinion. I mean, if there's nobody out there but it's just us, then who's to say you're right and Hitler's wrong? There's no objective morality. It's just in us, the subject. But we all intuitively understand there is an objective morality, and that objective morality we'll see when we come back next week is actually God's very nature. So these are the three main arguments. We're going to start here at the cosmological argument, and this is the argument that many say points to the big... Now some people are going, Frank, you know, we're Christians, and we don't believe in the Big Bang. You guys don't believe in the Big Bang? I believe in the Big Bang. I just know who banged it. The evidence for the Big Bang is indeed quite good. You even have atheistic scientists admitting this, like Stephen Hawking, who says almost everyone now believes that the universe and time itself had a beginning at the Big Bang. Now, Hawking tries to come up with another explanation for how the universe could come into existence out of nothing without God. It's not a good one, but he admits that space-time and matter had a beginning out of nothing. Another cosmologist, Alexander Vilenkin, put it this way: with the proof now in place, cosmologists can no longer hide behind the possibility of a past eternal universe. There is now no escape. They have to face the problem of a cosmic beginning. Now, a cosmologist is somebody who investigates the origin of the universe. Now, there's two interesting words in this quote. The first word is the word proof. Very unusual for scientists to use the word proof. Usually they say the evidence points to, the evidence suggests. When they say proof, they think the evidence is quite strong. The second interesting word is the word problem. Why is there a problem if there's a cosmic beginning? Because it gets too close to the G word. And we don't want to go there. In fact, Einstein himself, in order to avoid a beginning to the universe and therefore God, did what a third grader wouldn't do in math. He did something a third grader wouldn't do to avoid the implication that there was a beginning. We're going to see that here in just a minute, because Einstein's theory of general relativity is one of the lines of evidence that the universe had a beginning. Now, what is having these scientists and many others saying the universe had a beginning? What scientific evidence is out there? It's in an acronym in Chapter 3 of I Don't Have Enough Faith to Be an Atheist, and the acronym is SURGE, S-U-R-G-E. Each one of these letters stands for a different line of scientific evidence that the universe had a beginning. I'm just going to list them now, and we're going to go through them very quickly, very briefly. All the details are in the book. The S stands for the second law of thermodynamics. The U stands for the fact that the universe is expanding. The R stands for the radiation afterglow. That's the remnant heat from the initial Big Bang explosion. The G stands for the great galaxy seeds. We'll discuss that when we get there. And E stands for Einstein's theory of general relativity. These 5 lines of scientific evidence are even having atheistic scientists going, yep, the universe had a beginning. Now, let's go through these very quickly. The S stands for the second law of thermodynamics, which says the universe is running down. It's running out of usable energy. As time goes on, the amount of energy in the universe is running down. You say, so what? How does this show the universe had a beginning? Well, let's look at the universe as if it were a dying flashlight. Suppose I were to take a flashlight right now and turn it on, put it on this table, we were to leave and come back tomorrow. What would be the strength of the beam coming out of the flashlight tomorrow? Less, or it might even be dead, right? Why? Because there's only so much juice in those batteries. So the longer the flashlight's on, the less power it's going to have, right? Well, suppose I turned the flashlight on an infinitely long time ago. Would there be any light coming out of it now? No, it'd be completely dead. Same thing's true about the universe. If the universe was infinitely old, that sun would have burned up a long time ago. But it's still burning. Therefore, the universe must have had a beginning. This is indisputable, really. By the way, this is also called the law of entropy, that things go to disorder rather than order. The law of entropy, or the second law of thermodynamics, is why you have to put gas in your car, because you run out of gas. It's why things wear out. It's why you've got to put tires on your car. It's why you have to paint the building and maintain your house, because things wear out. The second law of thermodynamics even affects us personally. It affects us when we get older. That's when we get dresser disease. That's when our chest falls into our drawers. Okay? In fact, Paul even talks about this in Romans chapter 8. He says the creation is in bondage to decay. That's the second law of thermodynamics. But then we learn in the last chapters of Revelation that a new heavens and new earth are created. And the second law of thermodynamics won't affect us anymore. In fact, you can look at it this way. Nature will take a building and turn it into a pile of bricks, but nature will never take a pile of bricks and turn it into a building. That's the second law of thermodynamics. So if we're running out of order, if we're running out of energy, somebody must have put energy in there to begin with. Somebody must have put order there to begin with. Now, the U in surge stands for the fact that the universe is expanding. Does anyone know who that guy is right there? That's Edwin Hubble. Yes, he has a telescope named after him. Now, somehow back in the 30s, they thought it was cool to have your picture taken with a pipe. I don't know why, but they did. Anyway, back in 1929, Hubble was looking through this telescope at the Mount Wilson Observatory in Pasadena, California. And he noticed that all the galaxies out there are moving away from us because they had a red shift in the light. If the light was blue, it would have indicated the galaxies were moving in on us, but they're all moving away. So Hubble deduced something. He said, look, if all the galaxies are doing this, then yesterday they were here, and the day before that they were here, and the day before that they were here. You go all the way back to the beginning, the entire space-time continuum collapses back not to the point of a basketball or even the pinhead, but all space, matter, and time collapse back to nothing. So once there was nothing, and then the entire space-time continuum leapt into existence. So if time were reversed, the universe would collapse back to nothing. And you can see this now. You can see the expanding universe right now. This is empirical data that you can look at. Now, good scientific theories often predict future discoveries, and scientists thought, look, if the universe did explode into being, there should be some remnant heat left over from the initial explosion. In fact, they predicted this in 1948, which is when Sir Fred Hoyle, an atheist, said, what are you going to call this thing, the Big Bang? In a derisive way. Well, that derisive name actually stuck, and people started saying, yeah, it's the Big Bang Theory. But nobody bothered to look for this remnant heat until 2 scientists working at Bell Labs in Homedale, New Jersey, discovered it by accident. It leads us to the R, the radiation afterglow. That's Arno Penzias right there and Robert Wilson. They discovered literally the remnant heat from the initial Big Bang explosion. It's just a couple of degrees above absolute zero, but they found it. In fact, one agnostic astronomer put it this way. He said, those who still believe in the steady state theory, that's the theory that the universe was static and eternal, can no longer believe that. This has put the nail in the coffin of the last doubting Thomas that the universe had a beginning. This is literally the smoking gun to the Big Bang. It's still out there. The heat is still out there. Now, what is radiation afterglow? Another way of looking at it. You ever watching TV at night with the lights out? You know, one of those old TVs, the tube TVs? What do you see when you turn the TV off? You see a glow that's coming off the TV. That's remnant heat. That's radiation afterglow. Well, there's still a glow coming off the universe, and these gentlemen discovered it, and they won Nobel Prizes for it in 1978. Now, as I mentioned, good scientific theories normally predict future discoveries. Well, scientists thought there should be very fine temperature variations in that radiation afterglow that allowed the galaxies to form in the early universe. They needed these temperature variations so matter could gravitate and form galaxies. But they had no way to figure out if those temperature variations were there from Earth. They were going to have to put a satellite up in order to measure these variations. And so that leads us to G, the great galaxy seeds. They designed a satellite that they were going to put up to measure these temperature variations. And they were going to put it up on the space shuttle in the 1980s. Unfortunately, the space shuttle Challenger exploded off the launching pad. And they had no way to get the space or the satellite up. So they redesigned the entire satellite. They made it half its original size and put it up on a French Titan rocket in 1989. For 3 years, it circled the Earth taking measurements. That's how long it took them to gather the data. Then finally, in 1992, they announced their results. And the satellite was called COBE, for Cosmic Background Explorer. What they found were temperature variations that were down to 1 part in 100,000. The leader of the expedition, this man, George Smoot, who wrote a book on it called Wrinkles in Time, said, "We found the machining marks of the Creator." He said, if you're religious, it's like looking at God. That was the headline in a Time magazine edition, May 1992. If you're religious, it's like looking at God. What did they discover? They discovered such fine temperature variations that allowed the galaxies to form that if those temperature variations weren't there or any different, we wouldn't even be here. In other words, the Big Bang was not a chaotic explosion. The Big Bang was literally the creation event. It wasn't the explosion of an eternal pellet. It was literally the creation of space-time and matter, and then the explosion was shepherded through stages and is currently being shepherded right now. In other words, somebody's holding the universe together right now. Now, what does this say about Darwinism? Nothing. But I always hear atheists saying this, look, if evolution's true, if macroevolution is true, you don't need God. That's nonsense. Why? Even if macroevolution were true, you need a creator and a designer long before you ever get to life. You need a universe first, right? And a designed universe. So you need a creator and a designer from the split second the Big Bang began. Even if later evolution were to prove true, which it isn't, we'll get into it next week, you still need a creator and a designer from the very beginning. So this pointed out beyond any reasonable doubt that the cause was also an intelligent cause to the universe. Now the E leads us to Einstein. Einstein's theory of general relativity. And Einstein knew as early as 1916 that his theory of general relativity showed beyond any reasonable doubt that space, time, and matter had a beginning out of nothing. That space, time, and matter were correlative. That they came into existence together. Once there was no space, once there was no matter, once there was no time, and then it all leapt into existence out of absolutely nothing. But you know what? Einstein figured it out on paper. He didn't like it. In fact, he called the results irritating. So you know what the great Einstein did to avoid an expanding universe, which his calculations were telling him? He wanted a static eternal universe. The great Einstein put a fudge factor into his equations called the cosmological constant. And that fudge factor kept the universe static and eternal. It was a counterforce to gravity. He didn't want this, he wanted this. Now, in order to do this, the great Einstein divided by 0. Now, what are you told in 3rd grade? Never divide by 0. You can go straight to hell for that. Well, there were some mathematicians in the 1920s who were looking at Einstein's equations going, Al, you can't divide by 0. Your first equations were correct. Then in 1929, Edwin Hubble is looking through his telescope. He sees the expanding universe. And he says, this is exactly what Einstein's general relativity equations predicted, his original one. So he called Einstein. He said, Al, or Dr. Einstein. He said, Dr. Einstein, what I am viewing through my telescope, you predicted in 1916. Why don't you come out to Mount Wilson here in California and you can see the redshift for yourself. You can see what you predicted. back in 1916. So in 1931, Einstein went out to Mount Wilson and looked through Hubble's telescope. In fact, who's that right behind him? That's Hubble. You see the pipe? After Einstein saw the expanding universe, he said, I now see the necessity for a beginning. He said, all I'm interested now is to find the mind of God. The rest are details. Now, Einstein was not a Christian. He denied being an atheist. He also denied being a pantheist. So nobody really knows what Einstein personally believed. But his theory of general relativity has been proven accurate to more than 5 decimal points. I mean, you can almost every month see an article that confirms general relativity. If general relativity is true, space-time and matter had a beginning out of nothing. In fact, it's so sure that if Einstein were here today and you were to say, Al, I don't think the universe had a beginning, you know what he'd probably do? He'd probably do this. Because it did. Now, all this evidence led this man, Robert Jastrow, an agnostic astronomer, to write a book in 1978 called God and the Astronomers. Now, Jastrow, on page 1 of the book, said, I'm an agnostic on religious matters. In other words, I don't know whether God exists or not. And Jastrow, by the way, sat in the same chair Edwin Hubble sat in until Jastrow died just about 5 years ago. He was at the Mount Wilson Observatory as the main individual at that observatory, the main scientist. Anyway, he said, I don't know whether God exists or not, but then after going through some of this surge evidence that had been discovered at that point, here's what Jastrow says on page 14. He says, the astronomical evidence leads to a biblical view of the origin of the world. The essential element in the astronomical and biblical accounts of Genesis is the same. Then he went on in an interview to say this. And oh, by the way, that's an actual picture from the Hubble Space Telescope. That's Saturn in infrared. That's not a painting. Here's what Jastrow said in an interview. He said, astronomers now found that they have painted themselves into a corner because they have proven by their own methods that the world began abruptly in an act of creation to which you can trace the seeds of every star, every planet, every living thing in this cosmos and on the earth. And they have found that all this has happened as a product of forces they cannot hope to discover. That there are what I or anyone would call supernatural forces at work is now, I think, a scientifically proven fact.
Wow. So, y'all seen a mountain of evidence that there's God outside the Bible through what we would call creation science, right? So what's incredible to me is why is this not being taught in school? Because there's so much profoundly deep evidence, even more than there's not a God in school, and yet this is not taught in school, right? Huh? Politics, yeah. One side actually has to say, you know, we were wrong. You guys need to be in here, right? So how hard is it to say, you know, we were wrong? Some people rather fight to the death, right? But this is really good, solid evidence, right? Because if there was a beginning, there had to be a beginner. Somebody had to start it. And the evidence about the universe, I know this is big stuff. Y'all probably had to study this in years, right? The evidence is this was a controlled event. In other words, he'll get into it later. There's a rate of expansion that this has to occur at. And if it's off like 1 in 40 to the 40 millionths, the whole thing collapses. So this thing is a very controlled event. This is not just like poof, it went out there. It's a controlled event. And it shows design and intelligence within the universe. Now I know not many of y'all take physics, right, in school. In fact, if they say there's a physics class, who's going to sign up? Oh yeah, there you go. So maybe one out of a whole class, right? So this is really good stuff, and it's solid evidence, right? So I had a guy at work today. I was telling him I was teaching a class like this, and I said, well, there's more evidence for God than not. And he's like, what? You know, and he asked a great question. He said, well, okay, if there's a beginning, then where did God come from? Yeah, yeah, really. So that is a great question, and we can get into that later. But think about it. We live within a time, space, and matter environment. Right now, time is going by, right? I just spoke, 10 seconds went by, time's going forward, time is here, right? It's reality. We're in a space right now, right? And there's mass in this room. I'm 185 pounds. And I go up and down because I burn off energy, so it's mass, energy, all that's going on right now. And you really don't think about it, do you? That's all we know. So how can we even think about before time, space, and matter? There's nothing that we can even conceive, is there? It's more than the human brain can do. So if you think about it, if you think about the question that says, well, what about who made God, right? He'll get into that later. It's like we're thinking in human terms that we can't even get there. And that's the problem. We're trying to define God from a universal term, and He is outside of all of that. Wow. So you can get into that later. What do you think about this right here? Astronomers now find that they have painted themselves in a corner because they have proven by their own methods that the world began abruptly in an act of creation to which you can trace the seeds of every star, every planet, every living thing in this cosmos and on the earth, all right? And that's what, that there are what I would or anyone calls supernatural forces at work is now, I think, a scientifically proven fact. So if you look at that, he's going to talk to in a minute. There's only two answers behind the creation event, the Big Bang, or the universe started, right? It was an accident, or it was created by an intelligent source. The accident really doesn't work because it's a controlled event. You know? Accidents are accidents. And so it's such a controlled and defined event, and we can get into all the facts later, it's almost unimaginable that it could be anything other than an intelligent behind that. So the problem is you can still tell people this. You can still give them all this evidence, and yet what? Why do they not believe? The facts are here. Right? It's a will. You don't want to believe. That's the issue, right? What did Jesus say to the Jews? He says, you study in me, because in the Scriptures you think you find eternal life. But you refuse to come to me. In other words, you refuse to put your faith in me, your will. Oh, you study it well. You got it up here. But you're not willing to give yourself to me. So people don't want to surrender their will to someone else. They want to live on their own, right? We're independent creatures. So anyway, pretty good. So any questions so far?
Something else about the Big Bang is that everything came from the little atom size.
Mm-hmm.
And the law tells that matter cannot be created or destroyed. So how can the whole universe be created out of nothing if it's not because of God?
Yeah. Yeah, so the Big Bang, they said, it's not even a BB size. In fact, in Genesis, I think the original Hebrew says from nothing. It's ex nihilo is what they say in the original. From nothing God spoke. So the Bible actually confirms this before there was time. And you're going to see that in a minute. God spoke, and there it was. Wow. And just to think, now what's even more fantastic, if you believe that, where was Jesus? He was with him. And just to think that the creator of the universe came to live with us and die for us, that's just too much, isn't it? Let's go on.
Wait. Why would an agnostic say that it's scientifically proven that supernatural forces are at work? Why couldn't nature have created the universe? Because there was no nature. Nature itself was created. Nature was the effect. It can't be the cause. Now, it wasn't just Jastrow who said these things. All of these gentlemen are Nobel Prize winners in physics. We've already seen them. They helped discover the surge evidence. Arno Penzias. The best data we have concerning the Big Bang are exactly what I would have predicted had I had nothing to go on but the 5 books of Moses, the Psalms, and the Bible as a whole. His colleague, Robert Wilson, who believed in the steady state theory, that the universe was static and eternal, until he helped discover the radiation afterglow, put it this way. He said, certainly there was something that set it all off. I can't think of a better theory of the origin of the universe to match Genesis. George Smoot, the guy who said if you're religious, it's like looking at God. He helped discover the great galaxy seeds, and for many years he taught at UCal Berkeley. Put it this way. He said, there is no doubt that a parallel exists between the Big Bang as an event and the Christian notion of creation from nothing. Now, there's one other line of evidence I haven't discussed yet that the universe had a beginning. We've just been going through the scientific evidence. Let me give you a philosophical line of evidence that the universe had a beginning. Some people call this the Kalam cosmological argument. And it shows that time had a beginning. Look at this timeline right here. Let's say here is the present, right? We don't know what's going to happen here in the future, but here's today. Yesterday was right there. The day before that was right there. Last week was there. we don't know how far back this goes, but if the past were infinite, today never could have arrived. Why? You can't traverse an infinite number of days, because there would always have to be another day you'd have to live before you got to this day, right? I mean, if there's an infinite number of days before today, then you'll never get to this day. I know this certainly can give you intellectual constipation, but the point here is there has to be a beginning to time. In fact, the Bible even points this out in several places. We speak of God's secret wisdom, a wisdom that's been hidden and that God destined for our glory before time began. This grace was given us in Christ Jesus before the beginning of time. The hope of eternal life which God promised before the beginning of time. In Jude it says before all time. Even the Bible knew that there was a beginning.
Oh, well, I want to get that on there. So that was hard for me to get in my head. That seemed like weird, totally weird, right? But what he's saying is exactly right. So even the concept of time means there had to be a beginning, right? So there couldn't be yesterday or a day before yesterday, or there couldn't even be a present. If time never stopped, it's weird. It had to have a beginning. And the Bible speaks to that in such a clear way. Who knew that those things were true when it was given? Who knew that? The creator of time. God created time. So that's so weird that we're stuck in time and we're thinking past, present, and future. We can't even get the concept that God is beyond time. I can't even think that there's something beyond time. And yet it is. Because we know through the Bible, God talks about He's in the past, but He can always see through the future. He's here. We don't understand it. So the idea, what He's talking about, is really profound. So if you need to go back to the book and read that, it's a Kalam argument, K-A-L-A-M, basically saying, hey, we had a beginning of time. Yeah, we can't even measure time without a beginning. See? 30 seconds, right? How long is 30 seconds? Well, I had to start at 0, right? But if there was no 0 on the clock, where do I... Yeah, so that's what he's talking about. So let's go ahead.
The time. Now, if the universe had a beginning, then it must have had a beginner. The evidence leaves us with one of the following two options. Either no one created something out of nothing, which is the atheistic view, or someone created something out of nothing, which is the theistic view. Now, here's my one question. Which view is more reasonable? That no one created something out of nothing, or that someone created something out of nothing? Someone, of course. I was at Texas A&M last year, and an atheist during the Q&A raised his hand. He said, oh, no, Frank, I think number one is more reasonable. I said, number one is more reasonable? Hold on. Let's look at number two for a second. Number two says, someone created something out of nothing. Now, that is a miracle. But at least you have a miracle worker. You've got someone, right? Number one is a miracle with no miracle worker. That's absurd. I said, if you want to say that the entire universe can pop into existence without a cause, then you might as well give up on all science. Why? Because science is built on the law of causality, that every effect has a cause. By the way, it doesn't say that everything has a cause. There has to be an uncaused first cause that got everything going, right? Even Aristotle knew this, the unmoved mover. Not everything has a cause, but everything that has a beginning has a cause. If the universe had a beginning, then the universe had a cause. You know, I said to the audience that night, I said, look, to show you how seriously everybody in this room takes the law of causality, there is nobody in here right now that as you sit here, you are currently worried that a hippopotamus has appeared out of nothing by nothing in your dorm room and is currently defecating on the carpet. You don't worry about that, do you? Why? Because you don't think things are going to pop into existence out of nothing by nothing. As we sit here, we're not concerned that a raging Bengal tiger is going to appear right here and start devouring people. And by the way, if things can pop into existence out of nothing, why doesn't everything pop into existence out of nothing? Why don't MacBook computers pop into existence out of nothing? Could have saved me $3,000. They don't. There's got to be a cause behind it. In fact, here's a good question to ask an atheist. If there is no God, why is there something rather than nothing at all? Or you could put it this way. If there is no God, why does anything exist? Well, if the atheist says, well, the universe has always existed, therefore it doesn't need a cause, what do you say? Search. Second law, universe expanding, radiation afterglow, great galaxy sees Einstein, and throw in the Kalam argument, your move. The universe had a beginning, so it must be something outside the universe that caused it. By the way, if space, time, and matter had a beginning, then the cause must be outside of space, time, and matter, right? It must transcend space, time, and matter. In other words, it must be spaceless, timeless, and immaterial if it created space, matter, and time. By the way, if you're timeless, do you have a beginning? No. God is outside of time. He doesn't have a beginning. So the old question, who made God? Nobody. God is the uncaused first cause. He's timeless. He's outside of time. He is the unmoved mover, the uncreated creator. He is the one that got it all started and is holding it together right now. Now, I was at the University of Michigan.
What he's saying right there kind of makes sense, doesn't it? But it's hard to understand. So the first cause, if God created time, space, matter, the universe, then he's outside of that whole thing, right? But since we live inside of time, space, and that, we cannot fathom it, right? Even though our mind intellectually agrees with that somewhat, there's something in that head just goes, woo, you just can't get. The problem is, once again, we are finite creatures trying to understand an infinite God. It's kind of like the ant on the dock trying to understand a cruise ship. We're just not going to get there. So, but what God does give us is enough facts to get us close enough that we can believe. Right? So there's very few things in the world that's just 100% true anyway. Well, okay, I better be careful now. But there's a lot of things out here that you have to have faith in, right? So just an example. So if you're going to buy a car, anybody going to buy a car in the next week or two? So let's say you go buy a used car, right? How many facts can you get about a used car? Mileage. How many miles are on it? What else? Owner. Who's the owner? Was it 1 or 2 or 3? Right? Huh? Accident. Been in a wreck? Yeah. That's good. What else? Wow, what year is it? Is it 10 years old or is it last year's model, right? That's some pretty good stuff, right? So you got enough facts, right? You still don't know something, right? Is it really going to be a good car once you buy it? So when you're buying a car, you're trying to collect enough facts so that you get comfortable and you feel secure that when you pop down $5,000, $10,000, that thing's not going to break down next week, right? So you get enough facts, but still, when you buy it, that's an act of what? Faith. No matter how many facts you have, you still have to have faith, right? So you can get everything about that car, and it might break down, right? So that's what he's doing here. He's giving you enough facts. God gives us enough facts through creation, right? So Romans, first chapter of Romans says, although his invisible qualities are evident, see, basically people know that there's a God. It's proven right here. He gives us enough facts, but you will never have 100% knowledge, proof that God exists, will you? What God does give you is enough that you can have faith. So when it comes to these arguments right here, you don't have to understand all of these, but these help you with a car, but you still have to have faith. Okay? Even scientists have to have faith, by the way. By the way, they don't really know the formula for gravity. Gravity is the only of the constants in physics that we can't. It spreads across the whole thing. It's called kind of a lower constant. It goes across gravity, right? But there's no formula for gravity. We don't understand it. What caused it? Right? But we have faith that gravity is here, right? So gravity crosses all lines in physics. So anyway, yeah, physics. I'd like to take some of that stuff. Anybody want physics? But anyway, what's also interesting is the past 20, 40 years, scientists have actually come closer to an understanding of God, and a lot of the religious teachers have gone away from God. It's kind of like they passed each other. The scientists are seeing the proof, and a lot of what I call liberal theologians are going the other way. Isn't it weird? And you know why? It's evidence. Evidence. What he's talking about, evidence. Just like in a courtroom. There's more evidence to be a Christian than there is to be an atheist. What he's talking about. Okay.
Michigan last year, and one atheist during the Q&A stood up and said, Frank, this is a God of the gaps argument. What is the God of the gaps argument? A God of the gaps argument is when you don't have a natural explanation for something, you put God in the gap in your knowledge, and then later on you discover it really was a natural cause, and you look bad, right, for putting God in the gap. I said to him, John, this is not a God of the gaps argument. He said it is. In fact, if you give science more time, we're going to find a cause, a natural cause. I said, John, first of all, that's a faith position, right? Got a lot of faith. But secondly, you will never find a natural cause for all of nature. Well, all of nature had a beginning. It must be something outside of nature that caused it. By the way, when we say supernature, what does that mean? Something beyond nature. When we say Superman, what does Superman mean? It means someone beyond the man. Supernature means somebody beyond nature. If all of nature had a cause, the cause must be beyond nature, must be supernature. So I said, John, you're never going to find a natural cause for all of nature. And to say that just give science more time, you'll find it, that would be like me saying, look, if you give me more time, one day I'll figure out that I gave birth to my own mother. No, you won't find it. It's in a different category. If all nature had a beginning, the cause must be outside of nature. Now, this led this man, again, the agnostic astronomer Robert Jastrow, to end his book, God and the Astronomers, this way. And this is worth the price of the book right here, okay? Jastrow goes through all this evidence. Remember, he's an agnostic. He doesn't know whether God exists or not. He's not some Christian Bible thumper. He's simply just saying this is where the evidence leads. Here's how he ends the book. He says, for the scientist who has lived by his faith in the power of reason, the story ends like a bad dream. He has scaled the mountains of ignorance. He's about to conquer the highest peak. As he pulls himself over the final rock, he's greeted by a band of theologians who've been sitting there for centuries. No doubt reading Genesis 1:1. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. Now, by the way, can anybody give me any good reason why we ought not be teaching this surge evidence in our public school system? Did I say anything about the reason we believe this is because the Bible says so? No, I'm simply saying it's congruent with the Bible. There was a beginning. I'm not saying that we're getting our evidence from the Bible here. Why not just provide the evidence and let the kids make up their own mind? Look, if you can't teach creation, then you can't teach Aristotle. Even though he believed the universe was eternal, he believed in an unmoved mover. In fact, you couldn't even teach the Declaration of Independence. What's the Declaration of Independence say? We hold these truths to be self-evident that all men were created equal and endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, among them life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness. And oh, by the way, who wrote that? This is known as history. Thomas Jefferson, the man who said taxation without representation is tyranny. Well, what do you think Thomas Jefferson would do if he were to come back to America today? Well, he'd be very old, but if he were to come back to America today and he were to find out that his tax dollars were going to pay public school teachers to teach his kids that his Declaration of Independence was in effect unconstitutional, what do you think he'd do? He'd start the second American Revolution. We failed in the first one. What's this about? We're not teaching religion, we're just teaching the evidence. If it has a religious implication, well, so be it. You can't force kids to worship anybody. In fact, you can't force anybody to worship. All you can provide is belief that. You can't force belief in. You can't force people to believe anything. You just provide them the evidence, let them make up their own minds. Now, the next argument is the teleological argument. We're going to get to that after some. The question we're going to look at now, is it objectively true that God exists? Break.
If there was nothing, then how was there somebody?
Well, okay, good question. If there was nothing, how was there somebody? There was nothing physical, spatial, or temporal. In other words, there was no nature, but that doesn't mean there couldn't have been a supernature. In fact, it would seem, due to the law of causality, there must be a supernature. That if space-time and matter had a beginning, the cause must transcend space-time and matter. So when we say
Into
nothing...
the second, isn't this the second, in the end of it? So we I think there's good evidence that God exists, so we can all go home and feel better tonight, right?
There's like 9 minutes of question and answers.
9 minutes of question and answer. I'm going to give you all some time. So what did you learn tonight that you didn't know before? A bunch of stuff? Surge? Yeah? That's pretty good, right? I can't remember all that. I got to go write it down, right? I can remember some of it, but I don't remember all of it. So if you just didn't know anything about the Bible and didn't know anything about, and you saw this evidence versus what you see the atheists say, which one would you think takes more faith? Be an atheist? Yeah. Yeah, it's easier. It's kind of like, yeah. So it's just a lot of great stuff in here. So does anybody here feel more confident in the existence of God and the position of being a Christian? Do you feel more confident seeing this? Yeah. So you can take these facts, right, and you can combine them with what the Bible says. Man, that's just something else. Because guess who wrote the Bible? About 40 people probably did it. 39, 40 people over about 1,400 years, 3 different languages, and they all came up with this. Wow, so who actually wrote the Bible through them? Yeah, the creator of the universe. So when he talks about before time, and he says it from 3 different people over centuries, that's not an accident. There's one of those things in there, before time. Yeah, that's something we can't think of. So there's some pretty big stuff in here. This is kind of like a college level course, but I think it's worthy for you to know this before you go to school, and actually before you go to work the next day, because this is life. People are not used to solid, absolute truths. They're used to gray moral opinions, right? They're not used to facts. Facts scare people, right? And so what you have in our society is people have painted Christians in the corner as judgmental, fundamentalist, ignorant, right? And yet when you see that, what does that tell you? All this evidence. Wow. And we're even going to get into evolution later on, which by the way, science has been trying to support evolution for 100 years, and every year it gets weaker and weaker. They just can't say they're wrong. And there's absolutely very little scientific fact behind evolution. It's theory, okay? And they've been trying it for a year, and there's so many things wrong with it, but nobody can walk away from it, right? So you're going to see, it's scary, but why is evolution taught in the schools and not fact, right? Once again, it's politics, public pressure, and worse than that, it's just basically public opinion and ignorance about these things. So that's we as a group of people, Christians and followers, we've got to know this stuff. That's why it's important, because the truth you know is what you act on. So you better be sure you have the right truth. So any other questions? Huh? So somebody, let's pull up our Bibles and let's finish it up. I think this is mine. 2 Corinthians. 10:5. I'm going to read it 4. For the weapons of our warfare are not carnal, but mighty in God for the pulling down of strongholds. What are the strongholds we talked about? Public opinion, popular culture, yeah. Casting down arguments and every high thing that exalts itself against the knowledge of God. So what's acknowledge? So the problem is science seems to have exalted itself above God. But it's not science, it's people. Science is just evidence, isn't it? So if you look at true science, it's observable evidence, right?
Like how you put it, it says science is just facts, you have to have philosophers to interpret it.
Yeah, science is just facts. And the bad thing is scientists are bad philosophers too. That's what he says. And so, against the knowledge of God, bringing every thought in captivity to the obedience of Christ. Okay? So, let's go home, right? So now that we know there's truth out there and we know that God exists, it's going to be a better day tomorrow, isn't it? You probably kind of knew it before you came in here, but now you know why. So you got some foundation. Okay. They got the evidence. The evidence is huge. So, one other thing. Just because you believe something doesn't make it true, by the way, right? Right? Just you can believe something really, and it's just not true. And just because you have faith in something doesn't mean it's that. So if I have faith in, my faith doesn't change reality, right? My faith is important to me, and so truth stands on its own, doesn't it? Okay. So let's go to the Lord in prayer.